Welcome to this Audit and Scrutiny Committee. Before we begin, I just remind everyone that this meeting has been conducted from the chamber and remotely through Microsoft Teams. So before we begin the meeting, could I ask make sure that all microphones are switched off, and I'm going to ask Councillor Gordon Murray to lead this in prayer. The meeting is now recorded as well.
Acknowledge the sovereignty of you, Lord, that we know that you are in control of all things, that you are omnipresent and omniscient, and Lord, that you created the world in 6 days, Lord, that we can come to you for wisdom and understanding of the things we are deliberating on today. Lord, that we are told that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom, Lord. We pray that you would pour down your Spirit on us just now as we deliberate things of matter to our communities, and guide us, Lord, for we come to you with nothing. In fact, we have nothing to offer you, Lord. But as we approach the throne of grace just now, we are told to come boldly. You tell your people to come boldly to the throne of grace. And Lord, we are not worthy of coming to that throne of grace. But we have one hope in a crazy world. We are told that we are to be still because the Lord is our Lord. But we have a mediator and one who gives us hope for the world, and that is our Saviour, Jesus Christ, who gave his life so that we could live, who on Calvary's cross died for us and shed his blood so that we would be wiped clean of all our sin. And in that point in Calvary, when the day became darkened with an envelope of darkness over the world, that hope shone brightly. And we are shown so much grace, Lord. So, Lord, we ask you to go before us now in our committee, and we ask you to bless and guide the chair and the vice chair of this committee and all the members who are deliberating on all these matters, Lord. We pray for all the staff that have worked hard to produce the papers in front of us today. We pray for all our staff in very difficult times, and we're still seeing the consequences of COVID in our communities, Lord. And we pray for them, Lord. We pray for especially those who are vulnerable, those who are elderly, who are struggling, who have got physical and mental and even spiritual needs. Lord, we know that you can satisfy all these. Lord, we pray now that you would bless us and go before us and forgive our many, many sins. And Lord, forgive your servant if he has spoken anything amiss. For Jesus' sake, amen.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Now, in regard to the conduct of the meeting, a reminder of the following. Many are getting familiar with this now, but I'll go over it again just so you're familiar with it. If you're a member of the committee attending remotely, please leave your camera on and your microphone off. Officers attending remotely, please leave both off unless you are called to speak to a report or answer a question. A reminder to members and officers in the chamber of the queuing system. The chair of the committee controls the mics. First in the queue flashes green and the remainder are solid green. The chair will allow each flashing mic into the committee, which will change to red. Only 2 mics on the floor will be red at any one time. If you wish to come back on a question, please leave your mic on, and officers speaking to the reports, I would advise you to do the same. Committee members will be given priority. In regard to declarations of interest, members must leave the chamber or end the call remotely. Finally, a reminder that the meeting has been recorded and will be made available on the CONUS website following the meeting. I would like also to welcome our external auditor, Mr. Ray Boost, who will address the CONUS annual audit plan at item 13. I'm going to check, Ray, that you're actually online. You can hear us okay?
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I'm here in attendance. Yep. I can hear everything fine. Yep. Thank you.
That's great. Welcome, Ray. Thank you. Item 16 on SharePoint relates to appointments to the appeals panel. With the committee's agreement, I will take this item following approval of the minutes. So our first item on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting of the 9th March 2022 for approval. Agreed, okay. Second item is the minute of the meeting of the 18th May 2022, again for approval. Agreed. Third item is the declaration of interest. Members are asked to declare any interest they have in any items on the agenda. It would be helpful if members expressed why they are declaring an interest in the item concerned. Members in the chamber, please do so now by pressing your microphone on or remotely through Teams by using the raise hand function. And please ensure the declaration is repeated prior to the relevant item and you adhere to the protocol as previously indicated. I'm not seeing any declarations of interest either in the chamber or remotely, so there are no declarations of interest. Okay. So we'll now move on to item 16 on SharePoint. This is the appeals panel appointment of members. This report seeks the Audit and Scrutiny Committee to appoint 5 members to the appeals panel. Now, I've had expressions of interest, so probably to save time just now, I'm going to say some names of people who expressed interest to go on this. So I've got Susan Thompson, Francis Murray, Grant Fulton, the Vice Chair, Malcolm MacDonald, Ian M. MacLeod from UIST. That's 5 members, and I'd be happy to go on as a substitute. And Councillor George Murray has also expressed an interest to go on as a substitute. Are there any other members who would wish to go on as substitutes, and are you in agreement with the members that have been proposed so far? Councillor Johnny McKeever.
Happy to agree those that you've mentioned.
Thank you. So, just to refresh, sorry, who's seconded? Yeah, okay, thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. So just for the minute, we've got Councillor Susan Thompson, Councillor Francis Murray, Councillor Grant Fulton, Councillor Malcolm MacDonald, Vice Chair of Audit, Councillor Ian M. MacLeod, UIST, myself as Chair as a deputy, and Councillor George Murray as a deputy if required. Okay, I'm in agreement with that. Okay, so now we move on to the scrutiny, item 4. This is the annual employer equality monitoring report for 2021. This is an annual report detailing the employee equality monitoring information for 2021 as prescribed by the Equality Act 2010, Specific Duty Scotland Regulations 2012. And we've got Norma Skinner present with us today who'll speak to the report and answer any questions. Norma is your Organisational Strategy Manager and is based in the Chief Executive's Department. Ms. Skinner.
Yes, this report is already published. There's a requirement under the Equality Act to publish this information by the 30th of April. So this is already on the website. So this is just for information and for noting. It does provide some interesting background information. And just to highlight that there's no outline data really that is any cause for concern. Everything is in order with this, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Skinner. To Mr. Barwick, Chief Executive.
Just very briefly, Chair, I just commend this to members to read through. It's an interesting sociology of the Corla document, and I don't think there's any, as Ms. Skinner said, I don't think there's any issues that should be concerning us, but it's an interesting document, and I would commend it to members for information.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Members have any questions for either Chief Executive or Ms. Skinner? No. Agree with recommendation at 3 points. Sorry, Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah. What's PTNA? I'm sure it's explained somewhere on the report, but PNTA sounds very ominous.
I shall ask Ms. Skinner. Ms. Skinner to come back. She's busy looking through her papers at the moment, trying to see herself what it is.
I know now that I've been caught on the spot and I can't think off the top of my head, but I will come back to you on it. I will email you and let you know.
Thank you for that, Ms. Skinner. Thank you. So do members agree with the recommendation at 3.1? Agreed. Thank you. Item number 5 is training, internal training annual report for 2021-22. This report details the work of the internal training team in 2021-22 and provides an overview of training undertaken, participation levels and the satisfaction levels with training. Murdo Mackay is the Resilience and Training Manager based in the Chief Executive's Department, and he will speak to the report and answer any questions. Mr. Mackay.
Thank you, Chair. This report gives an overview of the work of the training section over the year 21-22. Just to note that a lot of the training during COVID was moved over onto an electronic e-learning platform, which gave access to staff to actually engage with the training. And a lot of the face-to-face live training was cut out. Now, as we're moving out of COVID, into the post-COVID era. A lot of the training is now being moved back onto face-to-face. There are still some restrictions and some risk control measures we have in place, but we are continuing with the training. And also to note with this as well, the feedback we've been getting back has been very positive as well, with high satisfaction with the training as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Mackay. And that is encouraging that you have good positive feedback from that. And it's important that the training does continue. And given that you have had COVID, I think you've done very well considering looking at the statistics that you have in that report. And it's good to see that it's been well received by all staff who have participated so far as well. Do members have any other questions? Councillor Gordon Murray.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Mr Mackay for the report. It was just a general comment or question. You'll probably share with me, Chair, that this committee has a very important role in the setup of the council and its decision making. So in respect of training, when can we have the induction and training for audit and scrutiny committee members? That I think happens at the start of every term.
Possibly the Chief Executive would be better to answer that one. Chief Executive.
Yes, Mr Murray's correct. We give the basic information during the induction and then follow that up. That will be after the recess, after the summer recess.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Could I also add on, Councillor Murray, from your point raised there, that there are other items on our agenda today which are very, very important, which we would cover. There's the interplan, which will come in the next 3 reports that we have, and there's quite a lot of discussion to be had on that as well. I want to engage all members, not just of the audit committee, but all members throughout the council in that. So, you know, there is quite a lot of training to be done throughout all members in regarding audit matters. Councillor Johnny McKeever.
Thank you. I'd just like to commend the in-house training team, because the challenges that they faced during this pandemic, I think they've done really well. And it was difficult for employees to access the training as well, but the online helped a lot. So I commend them for that.
Absolutely, Councillor McKeever. Thank you for these comments. Thank you. So do we agree the recommendations at 3.1? Agreed. Thank you, Mr Mackay. Thank you. We've got 3 reports coming out on service improvement, and with the committee's permission, I would like to take all 3 together, and we can come back and revisit the, for agreeing the recommendations at each one. But I think seeing we have Fiona Nape present with us, she's the author of all these reports. I think it would give her a good opportunity to express what she has detailed. There's a lot of detail in what Fiona does. Fiona's probably not known to many of the committee, but she's a very important cog in the wheel of audit. And she'll explain herself as she goes on her role, where she takes statistics. And I'd like to highlight to all core members the importance of monitoring service and performance, as well as the annual reports before us today. This can be done through the regular service performance monitoring reports to committee and through Interplan. Further information will be provided on this, and that will tie in with what Councillor Murray asked earlier on. There are 3 very detailed reports within this section. So I'm going to ask Fiona Nape now to speak to these collectively and then take questions. Fiona is the Senior Organisational Development Officer based in the Chief Executive's Department. And like I said already, she does tremendous work putting all this information together. So Fiona, it's over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The first 2 reports are on the Local Government Benchmarking Framework, known as the LGBF, and the 3rd report is presenting the local performance data from the Corla Service Business Plans. All 3 reports are for the 2021 period and represent the first year of COVID data, and the PI data is therefore not comparable to previous years. It's important to highlight that the second year of COVID data will be for 21-22. The current year's data is post-COVID, but it's recovery data for 22-23, and we won't actually see comparable data with the post-COVID data until 23-24. The Corla has satisfied its statutory duty to publish its 2021 performance by the 31st of March 2022, and the first report introduces the national report published by the Improvement Service on the 4th of March and is for noting. It provides a national overview of the LGBF data and emphasises how workforces adapted quickly to meet new demands, maintain essential services, and implement new ways of working. The second report presents the LGBF results for Ellenshire, and again is for noting. Directors and heads of service have presented these results in more detail at the service committees to enable members to monitor the performance of the services earlier this week and ask questions. Their reports include their service prioritisation SPIs, and they will continue to report the performance progress of the priority areas in their performance management update reports at each committee series. The third report presents the local performance, which includes the outcomes of consultations undertaken during the period and the LPIs where change has been greater than 10% in comparison to the previous year and also the target. The local PI results are presented to service committees at every series of meetings. In line with Audit Scotland's recommendations, elected members are encouraged to access the Corla's online performance monitoring and reporting system, Interplan, which contains the service business plans, the link to access Interplan's Executive Intelligence System, EIS, was emailed to all elected members yesterday with a how-to EIS guide to help them navigate the system. An overview of the system and training can be provided on request. The Corla's performance is made available to the public on its website within its performance pages under the broad LGBF service categories of children's services, adult social care, environmental services, culture and leisure, housing, corporate support service and economic development and planning. The LPI results for 2021 were published within the Q4 Service Business Plan Progress Reports, 12th of May 2021. The SPI LGBF results were published 4th of March 2022, and the Annual Public Performance Report was published 28th of March 2022, all before the statutory deadline of the 31st of March. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Nape. Thank you. I would commend the email that sent out to all members yesterday on Interplan. If any members do struggle with it, I'm sure Fiona will assist or Mrs. Skinner will assist you with it, but I do recommend that everyone actually opens that up and participates and looks through the progress monitoring. It's a very important tool and it's good for members, not just of Audit Committee, but of all members of the Council to see the functionality and the way things are working and progressing. So I'd recommend that to every single one of you, and it was sent, like it was said, or it was sent to all members yesterday. Just in case people were wondering what it was, it's not just an email to be dismissed and put into the bin. It is to be actioned, and I'm sure we will bring it. I think we could monitor it going forward as to progress as well, Ms. Snape, of how many members have actually accessed this before we come to training or in audit training. And is there a way that you can monitor who's come? What I'm trying to get is that every member engages and every member does go into Interplan. How could we monitor this going forward, just to make sure that happens?
The Interplan system itself does have a usage number for each officer, and we can take baseline data from this week and then we can monitor it on a quarterly basis or annual basis, depending on how frequent you'd like that information.
Possibly a quarterly basis would be fine to come in, so we'll be able to monitor that then and see. Yeah. Councillor Ray McKenzie.
Thank you, Chairman. Taking the three reports together, there was a few things. But anyway, starting off with table 2 in the first report, it's just interesting to see the costs, for instance, of children looked after. That's gone down considerably, and I suppose that depends on the numbers at any one time. The older persons over 65s, which is a bit close to home, residential care costs per week has gone, from 489 3 years ago, 3 years earlier, to 771. Maybe we can have an explanation of this. And the cost per attendance, again, I suppose COVID affected this. £2.90 now for in 2021, £46. So maybe could get some answers on these first.
I think Councillor McKenzie, these should probably go to the relevant service department rather than to. But I'll ask Mrs. Nape, can she actually do a broad brush answer for you?
Yeah.
And maybe you could direct these questions to the relevant service committee. Some of them are actually related to the IGB as well, I think, from there. But Mrs. Nape, would you like to, what you can of answer Councillor Mackenzie?
Yeah, the table of the cost indicators obviously just give the indicator of how much services cost. Bearing in mind that this is the first line of COVID data, the first year, it's important to actually look at the numerators and denominators that lie under this. And if I take, for instance, something like the economic development of assisting people into work, the percentage of that went down approximately 18% in comparison to the previous year. But when you look at the underlying information, the number of unemployed went up on baseline data from 300 to 500, and the Corla actually assisted 60, I think it was 67% was the unemployment rose by, and about 39% more people were helped into unemployment by the Corla systems. So it's important to obviously look at probably the detail that's in report 2, because that would give you the underlying data, and then services would be able to explain that from a service point of view.
Thank you, Ms. Nape. I'll ask the Chief Executive to come in now and come back to you then, Mr. Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just taking.
Could I get a light off, one of the lights off just now to?
Well, I'll put mine up.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm just taking blatant advantage of Mr. Mackenzie's question to highlight, which was around adult social care. Conscious that it would be correct to say the service delivery aspects are for the IGB, but I'm conscious that most members do not really have access to the IGB, and that's one of the reasons why we brought in the Social Work and Social Care Board, which is another opportunity for members to ask questions about the delivery of adult social care. There's a lot of data around children's services and social care services particularly. Doesn't imply other services aren't equally important, but there's a lot of data there, and that's another opportunity for members to ask the service questions as to the detail of cost and delivery. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, are you happy with that? Do you want to come back? Okay. Any further questions on the 3 reports? Councillor Callum McLean.
Thanks, Chair. It's in relation to section 6.5. Mr. Mackenzie picked up a few other things. First of all, it's the cost per preschool education registration, which has gone up, and naturally it's gone up because of the increase of hours. Has the government money that was promised mitigated this cost? In other words, they promised, the Scottish Government have promised that they would put in extra funding for this. So I'm just asking if this. Yeah.
Again, I'm not sure if Mrs.
I wouldn't have access to that information.
I think if you go through the service committee with that, Mr. McLean, they might be able to give you an answer for it. Okay.
It's difficult to know what's audit and what's service.
Yes, it's a service committee, but I would like to go back to, I know it's maybe digressing a wee bit, just always we touched on the Health and Social Care Partnership Board. A question that did come, and it probably it's relevant to this committee, because I think the question had asked about how, maybe Mr. Bird can answer this, the reporting structure of the new Health and Social Care Partnership Board with the IGB and vice versa. Mr. Bird.
Well, the IGB is the statutory body with responsibility for adult social care services. That's the service committee, if you like, for delivery of these services, and it's joint with NHS, as we all know. But it's well known, and it became particularly clear, I think, in the last term of the Corla, that members, I think members frankly miss the old social work committee. It's the services it delivers comprise nearly a quarter of our budget. It's important that there's questions and scrutiny about policy, about service delivery, as well as the policy issues. So social work and social care was set up recognising that under the previous regime it formed part of reporting to communities and housing, but that was a very busy committee agenda, and there really wasn't much time for any kind of questioning about health and social care matters. So for that reason, and also because of the National Care Service coming along, and I wrote to you earlier this week about the bill that's come out, we need a dedicated body to look at our responses to the National Care Service, but also to provide a greater group of members than the 4 who are on the IJB with a direct input into adult and social care matters. So that's the reason for the board. Can it take decisions? It can make recommendations, of course, to Policy and Resources Committee and Council in the usual way, but we have to recognise the statutory role sits with the IJB, and nothing we can do to change that. But we do need to. I think it's right that members are involved in more in adult social care, given it's such a major part of our work and our budgets.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Chief Executive. Councillor McLean.
I don't know if there's an opportunity, seeing Mr. Burr has talked about the constitution, the makeup of the IJB, having had experience of attending a meeting, not as a representative of the council. I felt from looking out, not looking from within, I felt that the constitution of that IJB board was heavily in favour of the health board. And I did feel that councils was pretty silent. I'm not saying that was still it, but I felt that it was put this way, overtaken by the number of health representatives at that committee, on that committee. What I'm asking now is, what is the constitution of the IJB board? Is it 50% council, 50% health board?
Executive.
It is, Chair. That's absolutely correct, and that's fixed by law. Probably before Mr. McLean became a member of the Corla, we did a lot of lobbying that the representation should be greater from local authorities, and indeed in the initial proposals we were allocated only 3 places, which we successfully argued up to 4 on the basis of geographical spread. But 4 is the maximum possible, and by law it is fixed at 50-50. I would agree with Mr. McLean's observation. If you were an outsider attending the meeting, it can have the appearance of a very health NHS-dominated meeting, partly because many of the staff representatives and the other statutory representatives come from the NHS side. So I can quite understand the point, but we cannot appoint more than 4 elected members. Just to complete the picture, the chief officer, of course, is the advisor to the IJB. I and Gordon Jameson, the 2 chief executives of the parent bodies, have a right of attendance, and other officers as required. So it's a point well made, and I think members will recall our unhappiness at the initial proposals on National Care Service, which would reduce the Corla's representation as matters stand to 1 elected member. And clearly there's a lot of work to be done on that point.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, just a comment and also a question about the school IT needs assessment. And the councillor in front of me probably know more about this than I do, but the Education Department secured funding from the Scottish Government and provided over 300 devices to school pupils, which sounds fantastic. I don't know if more were provided later on, but certainly during the COVID pandemic, that was obviously great. Community conversations, 55 responses were received providing suggestions for efficiency. That was what you said. We did. The results of the consultation was reported PNR as part of the business planning and budget considerations. I don't know what the current situation with these 55 were, what proportion were actually taken up or are being taken up. Yeah.
Okay, I'll ask, I don't know who, Ms. Napier, you can answer that, no? Maybe the Chief Executive can.
They were all fed back, Chair, through the budget board, and they would be given the consideration that the budget board felt right. But we would want to, I think, reactivate. We will be reactivating that process now that COVID restrictions are reduced later on in the year, and of course, bearing in mind what I said yesterday at Policy and Resources Committee, that there's the prospect of 2-year budgets, if not 4. So we'll certainly want to resume these community conversations, but the results were certainly fed back through the budget board and through them to PNR.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so do members then agree the 3.1, the recommendation 3.1 of the 3 reports that we had for service improvement? Agreed. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nape and Ms. Skinner. We now on to our governance report. This is a complaints annual report for 21-22. This report is for noting and details the Coroner's performance and handling in closing stage 1 and 2 complaints within the allocated time frame, which improved on last year's performance. And I'm glad to see Norma Skinner is here to speak to this report and answer any questions. Mrs. Skinner.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the Complaints Annual Report. It's for noting. It's already been published as is required by the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman. Just a couple of highlights. 29 out of the 34 stage 1 complaints were closed within the required 5 days, and 19 of the 34 stage 2 complaints were closed within the 20 days that are set aside for a stage 2 complaint. We did have 8 extensions agreed, and it's one of these interesting things where stage 2 complaints can be very complex and sometimes do take more than the 20 days. So you can have an arrangement where there's agreement for an extension. So although the PI looks not great at 56% for the amount of stage 2 complaints closed within the 20 days, if you include the 8 extensions in there where there was agreement, then that takes the closure rate to 79%. Of course, there's always room for improvement, and we do look at learning points every year in terms of what we're doing with complaints. So you'll see at 6.7, I have highlighted a couple of areas where I think these are learning points going forward. The need for good communication with service users, that really does come down to being the background of most complaints. Not all, but good communication always helps everything. So it's about continuously trying to develop and highlight how we are communicating, and also just going back to all the complaint handling officers through the departments, just letting them know again that if they can stick to the 20-day deadline, that would be good for our PIs. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Skinner. Before I open for questions, I'll ask the Chief Executive to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of words. Firstly, just to commend my colleagues for the improvement in performance in dealing with complaints. Secondly, to advise with the stage 2 complaints, I'm probably partly responsible for some of the delays, in that I do like to review the responses across services to stage 2 complaints, and inevitably that can add a couple of days or even a week sometimes to doing that. But I would rather, as Chief Executive, see what we are saying at the stage 2 complaint level, because it tells you a lot about services and responses. So probably the deadline would be slightly better if it were not for that. But as Ms. Skinner has said, stage 2s are often complex and extensions are often agreed. So with that, it's not manipulating figures to say that where there's mutual agreement that it can't be done within 20 days, the true figure is really 79%, which is very good indeed.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Thank you. Members, got any questions for either Chief Executive or Ms. Skinner? Councillor Francis Murray. Somebody comes on that, can you be elected?
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to say how heartening it is to see these figures, and I just wanted to ask, has training been possible for the officers during COVID time? Because having dealt with complaints at both these stages myself at various times in a past life, I know how important it is to be following the letter of the law.
Thank you, Ms. Murray.
Yes, thank you. The SPSO do training courses. What we did was we put one of our trainers, one of Murdo's team, down. They did it online. They did an SPSO training course, and they're now trained as a trainer. So we're rolling that out internally, and we have had in the past people, departmental complaint officers going down and working through the SPSO complaints as well.
Thank you, Ms. Skinner. You happy with that, Councillor Murray? Yeah, thank you. Okay, members agree. Recommendation 3.1. Agreed, thank you. Moving on to item 10 on our agenda, Annual Government Statement 2021-22. This report by the Chief Executive seeks approval of the proposed Annual Government Statement for 2020-2021 for inclusion in the Coroner's unaudited accounts. The statement appended to the report aims to assure stakeholders of the adequacy of corporate governance arrangements within Coney and Shear and aligns with the following item on corporate governance. And Mr. Tim Langley, Monitoring Officer, will speak to the report and answer any questions. Mr. Langley.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have anything specific to say in relation to the report. I would hope the government statement is self-explanatory. I'm happy to take any questions or provide further explanation if that's necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Langley. Anyone got any questions for Mr. Langley? No. We agree the recommendations at 3.1. Agreed. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Langley. We now move on to item number 11. This is the Local Code of Corporate Governance for 2022-23. This report by the Chief Executive seeks approval of the Local Code of Corporate Governance and Action Plan for 2022-23. The Action Plan for 2021-22 retains the themes of customer service and business continuity, but also includes a new theme for community engagement. Appendix 1 details all aspects of the Coroner's governance, which I would recommend to members, and a file, Corporate Governance, has been set up on SharePoint for members' future reference. And again, this is another one that I would commend to all members, not just members of the Audit Committee. There's a lot of detail in here. This really shows the mechanism and the workings. I mean, if true to say, it's the actual Bible for the Council. It shows you everything that is in the Council and the workings of the Council. There's a lot of reading in it, a lot of detail in it. You're not expected to read it all at once, but you are expected to go back and look at it and try and engage in every aspect of it if you possibly can. I'll ask the Chief Executive now to speak to the report. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've really said it all. I mean, this is a great database for governance within the Corla. If you need a link to any policy, practice, statement, constitutional documents that you can't find anywhere else, it is here. And I would really commend it to members and indeed for constituency inquiries on these matters, because it's all here. As you've noted, Leader, we're having a new theme for community engagement that just builds on what Mr. Mackenzie raised and what I mentioned a couple of items ago. We want to resume the community conversations. Now we can meet people in a more normal environment. We want to refresh the community fora that were set up for the budget consultations about 2-3 years ago, so we can have that dialogue and bring that back through the chamber, not just for budget matters, for other matters as well. But this is about the code. This is what comprises the code. Is in Appendix 1. There's the action points at Appendix 2. The fact that so many of them are ongoing is not an administrative device. They are obviously service delivery arrangements, structures and processes, service redesign. These are genuinely ongoing, and they will be monitored through this committee as well as through CMT. So it's there. It's there for your approval. A lot of it's there for noting, because these documents are facts that already policies that you've approved. But the whole document is there for your approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Executive. And again, I cannot reiterate enough the importance of these documents. What I found in the past term was those questions being asked at committees by members, and the answers were actually in these documents had the reports been read beforehand. So I would commend them to every member of the committee and every member of the council, because they are important and there's a lot of detail in it. And I've got to commend the staff and the members who have brought it all together. So it is there going to be on SharePoint under corporate governance. And if anyone's got any issues with that, please let the relevant officer know if you've got issues getting onto it. Do members agree, or as far as this committee's interests are concerned, members agree with recommendation of 3.1? Agreed, thank you. Now we move on to finance. This is item 12 on your agenda. It's the draft annual accounts for 2021-22. This report by the Head of Accountancy and Exchequer Services seeks approval for the submission of the draft annual accounts to Audit Scotland for 2021-22. The unaudited accounts required to be submitted no later than 30th September each year, but the deadline has been extended to 31st October this year. A special meeting of the committee will be arranged during October for the purpose of approving the accounts and the presentation of the auditor's annual report. I'm pleased to say Norman MacDonald is with us today to speak to the report and answer any questions. Norman.
Thank you, Chair. The draft before you today doesn't actually include the group accounts. We didn't have the figure for the valuation joint board figures available at the time when we were preparing the figures, but these will be added before the accounts are submitted for audit next week. And probably the only other point I'd make is that you're actually approving this version of the accounts for audit. You're not really expected to approve the content. That's the work of the internal auditors. They'll be here for the next 3 months, checking the figures and all the notes included in the accounts, and then come back to you in October, as you said, for once they've been audited. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. MacDonald. And again, I'd certainly like to use this opportunity to thank you and the team for a lot of people don't realise the work that's involved in gathering all this information into the accounts, and I know you've had a busy, yourself and the team have had a very busy period of number crunching trying to get to where we are. So we'd like to, on behalf of the committee, express our thanks to you and the team for getting to where you are in a time that you have managed as well. Members got any questions for Norman? Councillor Ray McKenzie.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, yeah, I concur with what you said there about the department and what they've done under very difficult circumstances. And of course, we haven't had a director of finance for the last year, so that's doubly difficult. It was the last statement Norman made about internal audit over the next 3 months. How is that going to be achieved?
I think Norman meant external audit, Mr. McKenzie.
Oh, external audit. Oh, thank you. Okay.
Councillor Gordon Murray.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the report. There is a period where it's open to the public to scrutinise and make suggestions. Can I ask when that period has started, and has the public notice gone out yet?
Mr. MacDonald, would you like to
answer? Thank you, Chair. Yes, the public notice needs to be out by the 17th of June each year. So it went on the website 2 days before that, and the actual inspection period starts on the 1st of July.
Okay. Is it going to the local media at all? Chair, sorry.
For the last number of years, we haven't put the advert in the newspapers.
Thanks. Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Members agree the recommendation at 3.1. I don't see any more. Sorry, Councillor McLean.
Thanks, Chair. Let me first of all say that in the absence of Director of Finance, I commend Norman's work. I mentioned to you before about the lateness of the report coming in, but I know he's got a lot of work on his plate. But it's difficult for members such as I, who are not accustomed to figures, to actually take in this in such a short period of time in a day. To be quite honest with you. Now, I take that about my own inadequacies, first of all. So, but the one thing I'd look at when I quick look at, I'm doing this from an ignoramus point of view, really, from looking at the figures. Looking at the figures on expenditures in the departments, it's not got a number on it, but I'm just looking at down here. I noticed it last night, actually. There's a fair amount of underspends. Am I correct in saying that there, for instance, I look at assets, finance, having 837 that's 837. Education skills, 1.3.
Councillor McLean, I think that came up at PNR yesterday. But I'll ask.
But this is an audit and scrutiny, Chair. Surely to
It's the
this.
same.
I wasn't
yeah,
at PNR.
It's a service committee, though. PNR is a service committee for this. But I'll ask Mr. MacDonald to come in and try and clarify that point that you raised. Mr. MacDonald, I'll just.
What table are you looking at?
I'm looking at a table here in blue. Yeah, it isn't. It's on financial performance, Norman.
Is it in the narrative section?
It's in the appendix. Sorry, so it's in the appendix.
The outturn report yesterday that went to PNR and which you'll have had access to has explanations for all these over and under things, and there was some significant under things in some of the departments. A lot of that was to do with grants, external grants that haven't been spent, but which will have to be carried forward to next year. So I think if you look at the outturn report, there is explanations for all these over and under things.
Could I probably ask if there is any, Mr. McLean, that you want clarity, and you could maybe speak to Mr. MacDonald with the committee, because it will give you peace of mind and satisfaction to what you, and it'll direct you to the right answer for your questions, I think, as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that there's a lot of figures there to take in or to try and understand. So once people have had a chance to digest it all, I'm happy for anyone to come back with any questions.
Mr. McLean, you want to come back?
I just yes, for slow readers and people who don't have figures at the fingertips the way Norman has, it is a difficulty right now.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any more.
This is,
Chief Executive.
Just to remind members, this is coming back to you in September in more complete form. These are just the draft accounts.
Okay, and so members agree the recommendation of 3.1. Agreed. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. MacDonald. We now move on to external audit. This is a Colonial and Share Annual Audit Plan for 21-22. This is a report by Audit Scotland. This report is the Corners Annual Audit Plan for 21-22 and provides an overview of the plan, scope and timing of audits in accordance with international standards for county and relevant guidance. Mr. Ray Boost is here from Audit Scotland and is here to speak to the report and answer any questions. Mr. Boost.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, and good morning to members of the committee. I thought I would start, because as you rightly say, this is our annual audit plan for the accounting year for 2021-22. And I thought I would start with a little bit of context for the benefit of members of the committee. So it's the Code of Audit Practice, which sets out our responsibilities as external auditors to the Corla. And that sets out our responsibilities at paragraph 7. So I will just draw that to members' attention, where we are required to give an independent opinion on the financial statements and the other information that's included in the annual report and accounts. And of course, that's the draft accounts that you've just approved for audit at the last agenda item. And our second responsibility is to assess and review on governance arrangements, the Corla's performance, how it uses its resources. And we do that through the 4 audit dimensions that are mentioned later in the plan, which are financial management, financial sustainability, governance and transparency, and value for money. So the Code of Audit Practice requires us to publish an annual audit plan, and that plan sets out how we will deliver on those responsibilities as external auditors, and we are required to share that with those charged with governance, which is why this paper comes before you this morning for approval and for information. So on that context, there's just a few things that I would like to bring to members' attention this morning. And first of all, just on page 5, we set out our materiality levels for this year. And really just to confirm that in terms of doing that this year, we've set our materiality at 1% of gross expenditure. Now that's no different from the approach we've taken in previous years. And from our planning work, we see no reason to make any changes to that threshold for this year's audit. At page 6, we explain our risk significant risk assessment processes. And at Exhibit 2, you can see that we have identified 2 significant risks in terms of the financial statements for 2021-22. So I'll just touch on them very briefly. The first of those is a risk of material misstatement due to fraud caused by the management override of controls. And that's a risk that most of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with. It's a risk that by its very nature cannot be rebutted. It's a risk that features in all of our annual audit plans, so it's by no means unique to the Corla. And it simply reflects the fact that irrespective of the control environment that exists, there will always be some degree of risk that arises through management's capacity to override those controls. And so we set out that risk, and we also set out our planned audit response to give ourselves the required assurances that will permit us to form an independent opinion on the financial statements. And you can see from the bullet points at Exhibit 2 that would include extensive journal testing, looking at areas of what appear to be unusual transactions, carrying out various analysis of this year's accounts against last year's to identify any kind of significant changes that will direct some of our audit attention, and then any kind of estimations that can involve complexity and can be subjective. We look at the methodology used and applied to those estimations. In terms of the second significant risk, that is in respect of the valuation of land and buildings. And we recognise that as a significant risk based on a couple of things. First of all, we note the significant value of the land and building assets on the balance sheet. Last year it was over £200 million. And we recognise also the significant subjectivity that is included in the process of valuing land and buildings. And I think it's exacerbated this year because we recognise that the Corla have appointed a new valuer for 2021-22 onwards, and that inevitably means there will be some changes in the methodology that is used by the valuer. So we recognise that creates an increased risk. Again, in the bullet points, you can see the planned audit response that will allow us to address that risk and get the required assurances. So not only does that include an evaluation of the new valuer, but it also includes an evaluation of the control environment at the Corla, which includes the accuracy of the information that is provided to the valuer to carry out those the evaluation work each year, but also how the Corla assesses critically the evaluations that are undertaken, and how that ultimately is processed through to the ledger and to the financial statements. So you can see the work that we will undertake to do that and get the required assurances. Other than that, from page 10, we talk briefly about the work that we will do in respect of our wider requirements around performance. I'm sure members are aware that this year the Corla has a best value audit review, which is currently ongoing. So in terms of our financial audit work, the wider dimension aspect of that will focus primarily on following up annual audit report recommendations from last year, and they'll be reported in our report coming back to committee later this year. Finally, just to kind of touch on the audit timetable. So this is the plan as disclosed at Exhibit 5 coming to today's committee. In terms of our independent auditor's report and our annual audit report, the date of those have to be confirmed. But as Norman mentioned at the previous item, our expectation and our ambition remains to complete this work by the end of October of this year. So I would just ask members to bear that in mind, and we would hope that a committee date towards the end of October could be accommodated for us to bring those back to committee for approval. And just for clarification, we bring our annual audit report to that committee, and of course it would be the Corla bringing their audited accounts. That's Exhibit 5. Exhibit 6 is just a slightly more detailed table of the processes and the dates that are involved, and nothing more to add in that respect. So there's nothing else that I wish to bring to members' attention. I am, of course, Chair, happy to answer any questions that any of the members of the committee have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Booston. I must admit it's good to be back working with you again and haven't. But before I open it up, you missed an important page on the report, which I want to maybe ask a question myself personally on page 14, on the annual audit fees. It'll be amiss of me, as you know, in past years. I know Mr. MacDonald's probably too nice a gentleman to ask this, but I'm a bit surprised that the cost is actually going up this year, given that, you know, you haven't had travel costs incurred coming to the islands in the past 2.5 years. There's obviously been savings from the Audit Scotland team in that sense. So has that been taken into consideration? You might not be able to answer this. You may need to go back to Brian Howarth to answer this, Ray, but I would have thought that maybe there was some kind of concession to the local authority here, given that, like I said, that's just one aspect of travel. We do value the work you're doing, and I'm led to believe, and I'm grateful too, that I understand there may be an extension to the Audit Scotland contract for the Chief Executive's nodding beside me for another 5 years for the Córa, which we welcome as well because of ongoing and continuity. But the cost is a concern. I have raised this with both Mr. Jamieson and Mr. Howarth before, but we don't seem to have got anywhere. And as an add-on to that, I'm conscious too that the element that you do for the IJB from the local authority here, is that fully costed out, or is there a fee affiliated to the health board to cover the IJB side, or is the council fully responsible for the total cost? Just a few things to throw in there before I open up the report to the committee. And I appreciate you may not be able to answer but I would like you maybe to come back to us as a committee, or come back to Mr. MacDonald or the Chief Executive on the cost side of things. Ray.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and first of all, just in terms of the upcoming term, you're correct that Audit Scotland will continue for a period of a further 5 years into the next audit rotation. I don't know who that team will involve, so whether there's any kind of continuity, that will remain to be determined, but you're correct that it will be Audit Scotland. In terms of your point on the fee, yeah, you're right. It's probably one that I would take back to Brian and to David to give you excuse me, a more full response and a full explanation for how the fee is determined. I do take on board your point about the lack of travel there has been, but I think that tends to be offset by some of the additional challenges that remote auditing incurs in terms of delays both on our side and on the caller side in terms of being able to provide the audit evidence and going through that process. There's also a kind of more complex mechanism that's applied across all of the audits, so that the cost and the fees and terms that are applied to each individual audited body are the travel aspect is actually already shared out amongst other audited bodies. So whilst we've not been travelling up to the Córa, that effective saving would equally then be shared out across all of the other audited bodies in the same way, using that same mechanism. So that's probably not a very eloquent way of trying to explain it, and that's why I'll reach out to the team and I'll ask Brian or David to provide a more formal response directly to yourself, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. It just does seem excessive that for the committees, those who have maybe not seen it, that the cost to the Córa is £212,960 for the audit fee per year. That does seem quite high, and from my point of view, it seems high. Maybe I know we appreciate the work you're doing, but I would really appreciate if, from an Audit Scotland point of view, you could look at it from the Córa's point of view, because everyone is trying to save money at this current time, and pressures are on. Like, we're meeting with budgets, everything is squeezed at the moment here. So yeah, I would appreciate if you could look at that and ask Mr. Howarth maybe to come back to us on it. On the IJB side of it, I mean, is there a slice of the cost element being put to Health Board, Ray, or are we footing the bill for the whole thing?
No, I mean, there's two entirely separate audit fees. There's an audit fee to the Córa purely for the Córa audit, which is what we're discussing today, and then there's an audit fee that is set for the IJB, which would be equally shared by the two parent bodies, being yourselves, the Córa, and the NHS board.
Yes. It's just that I missed that line, obviously, in my previous term in the IJB, where I didn't see the line in the budget as an audit fee, but we'll maybe follow that up and see. Yeah, thanks, Ray. Okay, I'll open it up then with the main report to Mr. Councillor Ray Mackenzie.
Thank you. Yeah, it's confusing. There's a lot of Rays around, which is quite unusual today. The page 15, this is just a statement here on I think it's number, whatever, 41, I think. From our initial view of the internal audit plans, we do not plan to place formal reliance on internal audit's work for our financial statements. Is that a general thing?
Ray, would you like to come back in and answer Councillor Mackenzie?
It's actually kind of unique to this year. So we planned ahead, and as a team, we were aware that this year the Corla were having a best value audit review. So we knew that resource would be focused on some of that aspect of the work. So what the accounting standards allow us to do is to place reliance on controls that we've tested in the prior year, 1 year later. So we've been able to do that in the current year, which is why we've not needed to then go to internal audit and have any requirement to place any assurance upon any of their work, because we've already been able to take assurances through our own work in terms of looking at the financial controls that are in place and assessing that they still exist, and having operated effectively in the prior year, we can take assurance that they continue to do so in the current year of audit.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Councillor Mackenzie, do you want a supplementary, or are you?
Yeah. Well, actually, my main point was going to, well, I don't know what page it is. It says 7 here, but improvement is required in relation to the rights of access by the internal audit to the Corla's documentation. And access was withheld by senior management on 2 occasions. Internal audit must have unfettered and unrestricted access to documentation relevant to its work.
Councillor Mackenzie, that's in the next report, Councillor Mackenzie. I think it'll come up in the next report.
Well, okay. Well, I'll bring it up.
You can
bring it up at the next.
If we bring it up at the next
okay,
report, then we can
fine.
answer it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Do members have any other questions on this, the internal audit? It's for noting, so noted. Okay, thank you. So now we're moving on to internal audit matters. Item 14 on the agenda is the internal audit annual report and assurance statement for 2021-22. This report looks at the evaluation of elements of the Corla's internal control, risk management and corporate governance systems based on the work of internal audit for 21-22. Now, before I ask the Chief Executive to address this report, I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to Mr. Paul McCaskill, who has left the Corla to take up a new post with Argyll and Bute Council on 4th of July. Paul joined the Corla in March 1998, initially into temporary employment as a clerical assistant, then as system admin clerk. In 1995, he moved to a trainee accountant post, and following his training, he became a senior accountant in 1998 and a principal accountant in 2002. Paul was appointed to the post of Chief Internal Auditor in May 2004, and in addition took on the role as designated person for the Harbour Board in 2008. I wish to commend Paul for his work and commitment to the Corla over a 29-year period, and for his leadership of the Corla's audit team over the last 18 years. He was a great support to me personally since my appointment as chair to the committee in 2017. Paul was an excellent officer, and he would be a great loss to this Corla. However, our loss is someone else's gain, and on behalf of myself, chair of the committee, yourselves as committee members, the wider Corla membership, I wish him every success in his new role as Chief Internal Auditor for Argyll and Bute Council, and wish him all the very best for the future. I will now ask the Chief Executive to speak to the report and also provide an update in regard to the future resourcing within the internal audit section. Chief Executive.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And obviously I had my own tribute to Paul's work as Chief Internal Auditor. It was good to work with him, and he was a very committed member of the team. And we will miss him. We wish him well, of course, in Argyll and Bute, where I think this very day he's speaking to their equivalent of Audit and Scrutiny Committee. Otherwise, I think it would have been good for him to be here to hear these tributes to him. So I'm presenting someone else's report. This is the internal audit report. few matters to bring to your attention. Which of course I've lost. Yes, 3.16, to which Mr. Mackenzie alluded. The second bullet point there, at the time of writing the report, there was one vacancy in the post of auditor, and the chief internal auditor, that's Paul, as we've noted, has left the Corla's employment or will shortly do so. And rightly, the report talks about appropriate arrangements to be put in place. The audit team is very small. It's the minimum, as you will have noted in other reports, it's the minimum which internal audit itself considers to be essential for the performance of its role. So we are not rich in internal auditors, just as we aren't in any other support service. We run on an adequate rather than a generous. So two members. The third member of the team, as you know, is Chrissy Macaulay, who's with us today. We advertised the vacant post of auditor as soon as that became vacant, and I'm pleased to advise that we have made an appointment of an auditor. So presuming that follows through, and there's no reason to think it won't, that's 2/3 of the team restored. We will advertise, we have advertised, of course, for the post of Chief Internal Auditor. I have to advise the committee, though, and I've spoken to Audit Scotland very helpfully on the subject. These posts are not easy to fill. I was speaking to a colleague in a council very near Edinburgh who has advertised 4 times for a Chief Internal Auditor. Dundee City Council, where our previous Director of Assets, Finance and Resources now worked, is on its 3rd advert. So these are not easy posts to fill, but that doesn't mean, of course, that we can't attract somebody, and we will see what comes through there. I'm obviously obliged to consider interim arrangements. That can be done through other councils. That can even be done commercially if we have to do that. A number of councils, an increasing number of councils across Scotland, deliver the Chief Internal Audit Service on a combined basis. The 3 councils in Forth Valley. There are others which share. One of our other Islands Council colleagues has the function discharged entirely by a mainland council. Now, obviously, we would rather not do that, as with any post. We would rather have somebody based in the Western Isles, serving the Western Isles, and we will always advertise on that basis. But obviously, I have to look at other arrangements, and I am doing that and have done that. And I'm speaking to Audit Scotland, who've been very helpful with any suggestions in that regard. So at the time of reading the report, as opposed to the time of writing, an auditor has been appointed, and we will try to fill the Chief Internal Auditor post. Now, the bullet point at the foot of page 7 there, obviously important. The Chief Internal Auditor has reported that access to a file was withheld by senior management, and rightly notes that internal audit should have unfettered and unrestricted access to documentation relevant to its work. Now, the matter was, I won't talk about the details of it in a public forum. I can easily do that in private if that's what the committee wants to know. But the important line, I think, for the committee is this was identified to me as Chief Executive. I took relevant advice on the matter because this occurs from time to time in councils across Scotland. What are the rights? What are the powers of internal audit to as it were, acquire information or demand files or whatever? And that advice was very useful. It was detailed. It was helpful. It was from a legal perspective and from an audit perspective. And I'm very pleased that Mr. McCaskill has concluded the rights and powers of internal audit in relation to access to documents has since been satisfactorily clarified. So that is the matter. I have sent a detailed document to Mr. McCaskill, and that is what is the result of that finding. So we know where we are on that matter. I have never withheld a file from internal audit in my career, and I can't see me doing so. So we will pursue anything outstanding regarding that particular inquiry. Anything else? I think that's as much as I want to say on that matter in public. Moving on to 4.9. Important point there about the hybrid and home working. We will want to, the auditor rightly notes, we're not just looking at various options, of course, we're implementing various options of hybrid and home working, and these arrangements should consider issues such as security, confidentiality, business continuity. Now, management team is indeed assessing that, and we will come back to you and Policy and Resources Committee and HR Subcommittee on all of these issues, because we need to know that home working is working, not just for the staff, but for the organisation and for the people we serve. So that's an ongoing one, and it's very important that that's noted. Finally, from me at 4.13, as the committee's already noted, our internal audit section were the appointed internal auditors to the Integration Joint Board. And of course, due to resource issues, that they can't provide these services to the same extent in 2022-23. Now, I have made an arrangement with NHS Western Isles that the commercial auditors whom they employ will undertake some of the more routine, if I can put it that way, audit work for the IJB, and that will leave the team free to look at the strategic work, as it were, such as you're hearing today. So it's been a challenging time for internal audits. I mean, my thanks go beyond regretting the absence of Paul's services. I mean, they have had a very busy year. The reasons for which you know, there was one significant investigation in respect of a previous contract. There was another significant investigation in terms of a current service, and that in a section of 3 takes up a great deal of time and energy, and yet the work has gone on. I mean, it's good to hear our external auditors. And can I just note, I too am very pleased that we'll be working with Audit Scotland over the next 5 years, because I can say I think they have the best knowledge of local government and the services we provide. So I'm pleased to see that. So they've internal audit has delivered a very good service over that time. And this is Paul's report, not mine. The commentary is mine, but it speaks for itself, I think, and I think members can be satisfied entirely with what the Chief Internal Auditor is saying. Key issues for me are tidying up any of these issues, but ensuring that we fill or have the ability to discharge the Chief Internal Auditor role as quickly as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Before I ask Councillor Mackenzie to come in just now, just on the home working side, Chief Executive, is there any review made to bring more staff into the building? Because what we're getting, well, what I'm getting as a local member, and I'm sure other members are getting at the moment, is that they're not able to access members that are working from home. And I believe even the frustrations coming through reception here as well, where people are trying to get a hold of people numerous occasions and they can't get through to them. So it's really just, is there a plan in place to address this to make it easier for public to access officers?
Well, two points there, Chair. I mean, the world of work has changed forever. I think that's the first point. But it is what has to be balanced out are the needs of the organisation, the needs of our customers, and yes, the needs and wishes of our employees. I think. And we have adopted an incremental approach to return to the office. Every member of staff has submitted, who wishes to work at home or partly at home, has submitted their requests and their thoughts on that, and that has either been approved by the head of service or not. So all the arrangements that are currently in place are approved by relevant heads of service. You will see some departments, most people are back. Others, most people are still working at home. That's what we want to review. We have the current arrangements are in place deliberately until the end of August, i.e. the end of the summer period. Then CMT will listen to soundings, including from members, and I'll be asking for members' views on that before we move to the next phase, presuming that COVID remains in remission. Whether people have a legitimate expectation to turn up and expect to see the person they want to see is another matter, because that was never the case pre-COVID. I mean, one could not just turn up and say, I want to see this particular planner or this particular social worker or any officer. I mean, there was always a requirement to make an appointment if you wish to see an individual. What we do want to monitor, though, is whether there is somebody there to give information, to make sure that people can pick up what they need, can obtain the contact details they need, can obtain the information they need, because that is a service which anybody who turns up at a public building, I think, should expect. Norman MacDonald, who looks after customer services, is also here, and I might ask him to comment on that specific aspect, but be assured CMT will keep this under constant review.
I think, Norman, we want to, maybe Councillor Mackenzie, please light off just now. Yeah. Thank you, Norman.
I can't remember the question actually. I was reading the report when you were asking, but in terms of the reception areas, having difficulties. I mean, for the last period, there have been a lot of complaints to receptionists about access, the public accessing members of the support teams. I suppose as the building opens up again, there will be a system in place for people to get access to planning or whatever. But I think the important thing is that if we are opening up the building, these people have to be in the building itself rather than being based at home, because I think that's where most of the complaints are coming from. It's people coming into the building now that they think it's open, and then there's no actual staff for them to deal with.
I think, Mr. MacDonald, the complaint I'm hearing, and I don't want to elaborate too much on this, I can speak to it with committee with it, but the complaint I'm getting myself personally most of all is that they're phoning into reception, looking for somebody, and reception are trying to get these people on their mobile phones or their home phones, and they're not able to access them. Now, I don't know, is there some system in place to monitor the workload of people working from home? I know I'm conscious of the ones myself in and out of here every other day, the people that are at their desks faithfully week in, week out and day out and putting in their shifts. But how do we know that every employee is putting in a full shift that is working from home? That's really the question I'm trying to do as well.
But I think that's really a matter for the service departments. It's not something I can comment on. From my own point of view, I can look at my own staff and see what they're doing, but I can't comment on what the staff in other service areas are doing, or if they're available.
I don't know if there's something we could do, Chief Executive, from Audit to monitor it a bit more closely, or what's the best?
I don't think so, Chair. I mean, that monitoring of workloads and productivity and production is always a basic role of management.
So, sorry. Could someone put a light? I'm trying to get. Sorry.
Is always a basic role of management, and it is for managers to be accountable to directors and ultimately to me for how their services are discharged. All I can say is that we are not receiving complaints from members of the public on these subjects. I mean, I think there may be an expectation, and I've said there never was an absolute right to turn up at a desk and say, I'd like to see this officer or the duty social worker. You have to wait. You have to see. You have to make an appointment. So people, I think, the expectations are perhaps not reflective of what the pre-COVID practice was. But as I've said, there has to be somebody to give information, to give a reasonable level of service. If there are issues about contacting members of staff, then everybody who works from home has a number. if there's issues about them not answering it or not being available, these are management matters. But it will be coming back through Human Resources Subcommittee, certainly, and Policy and Resources Committee, as we monitor this and as we see how the move back to the office and hybrid working moves on. My observation is that many employees who had thought they wanted primarily to work at home are now very keen to be back in the office, and that I think is as expected, but we will keep an eye on it. There are some services, of course, which are very much not front of house, and I'm looking at finance. You will see the finance corridor relatively quiet, but these are services with very little public contact, and as you've seen from the agendas, the work on the accounts has gone on as before. Other services have an element of public facing, and we need to ensure there's somebody there to engage with the public.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Could I ask Councillor Mackenzie, would you like, I see Councillor McKee or two, but you were in first, Councillor Mackenzie, so I'll ask you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's difficult just on that last point for the reception staff, and I'm sure they don't complain, but there is a problem probably getting hold of people. I'd just like to add also about Paul McCaskill, you know, that it is a great loss to the council. I mean, he's been a fantastic servant to the council, and he's had a horrendous year, as we know, and so have internal audit. It's a shame that he's gone to another council and he's working a few hundred yards up the road. But Argyll and Butte's gain is our loss, so that's, I would put it that way around. So to get back to the point, I think I'm referring again to 3.16, where improvement is required in relation to the rights of access by internal audit to the core list documentation of files. Access was withheld by senior management on 2 occasions. Internal audit must have unfettered and restricted access to any documentation relevant to its work. And it's disappointing that 2 qualified auditors were refused access to information relevant to our work and duties. Now, I don't know what conversations went on at that time, but it's pretty obvious that something was held back, which shouldn't have been held back. There's been a discussion since when the information presumably was handed over eventually, but that doesn't absolve the situation. And what I would like to know, and if it's got to be in private, fair enough, but what documents were withheld and who withheld them? But first of all, I don't believe the first question there has to be taken in private. What questions were withheld? What documents were withheld? Thank you. That's my first point.
Do you want to come back with another one too, Councillor Mackenzie, and then we'll try and address. Light on.
Yeah, sorry, yes. Well, the second one is over the page, and again, it refers to the admission that we, as a council, made the admission in the Kenman situation for us liability. Without liability, admission of liability for 450,000, and I think with the legal costs, this came to about $750,000. So we maybe didn't admit liability, but at the end of the day, you know, we had to pay that out. I'm sure others will bring out the other. I have a few other points, but this is very disturbing, I think, this report. I would go as far as to say, I hope this report doesn't reflect why Mr. McCaskill left.
I'll ask the Chief Executive to come in as best he can, obviously in an open forum, to answer your question, Councillor Mackenzie.
Well, Chair, the answer on which documents would be the same whether the matter was in public or private. I have no idea, because it certainly wasn't, the matter was never discussed with me, except the point is, the point that was discussed with me and the point that is my responsibility is to ensure that internal audit are able to go about their work in the right way. I will talk about in private the circumstances here, but I won't say any more than that. But suffice to say this, the matter was brought to my attention. I took advice. I thought this is a good time to clarify what everybody's rights are. What are the rights of the director, the head of service, internal audit? Let's get all this clear. What are the legal duties on the council? What are the limits on the powers of internal audit? What's the extent of their? Let's get the whole situation clear. And I did that, and I got very good legal advice on that. I also discussed the matter with a number of chief internal auditors of my acquaintance, and I issued a very long document to Mr. McCaskill and others, and the matter, as he himself reports, the rights and powers of internal audit in relation to access to documents has since been satisfactorily clarified. So the matter is satisfactorily clarified. That's what's important to me, and that is what should be important to you as a committee.
Councillor Mackenzie, yeah. Well,
first of all,
before we come back, I think, could I ask that you had a second question as well about the Kenman, and maybe ask the Chief Executive, just in case you want to follow up on
well,
that.
can I just come in to say that I'm not saying that it was the Chief Executive that withheld the document, the two documents. I'm not sure if he knows who it was, but maybe a clarification on that point.
We may need to go into private if we're going to go into that depth of. So,
yeah, happy just I'm not prepared to talk about individuals in public.
No. Do the committee feel that they need to go into private to discuss this further? Are you happy to get back to a follow-up, or are we better just to get into private just now, or after at the end of this meeting?
Second point.
But your light's not on, Councillor McKenzie. Yeah.
I'm happy that it goes into private, and I'm making the point that I'm not saying, I never said it was a chief executive that withheld the information. But I did mention a second point, which was a question of the Kenman holding, which was unfortunate, to say the least, that we had to pay out $750,000.
I'll ask the chief. We will go into private then after, at the end of the meeting, to follow on with your first point. I'll ask the Chief Executive to come back on the Kenman.
Well, I've really nothing much to say on Kenman. It's all there, but it is important that the Corla note the facts. We settled this case without admission of liability for a sum inclusive of legal. We did not pay the legal costs of the other side. The sum was inclusive. We did not pay the costs of the other side. Of course, we had our own costs inevitably over an action that went on for this period, but the settlement was a settlement. It was not a settlement plus expenses. It is important that members realise that. It was it was taking the totality of the matter and agreeing a sum. And I would ask members to note that internal audit themselves have consistently said that the settlement itself, never mind the reasons for settling, was a very, very good one in the circumstances. And you will receive further advice as part of the internal audit follow-up report, which you're aware is ongoing, and I will be reporting to you in September on that very matter, and I believe that will confirm the fact that the settlement was a very good one.
Thank you. Councillor Macaulay, Macaulay, will you want to come in, or do you have to wait till we go into the private session for your question?
Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to wait till we go into private if you wish, or I can ask my questions now and it can be answered when we go into private.
Okay, yeah, ask the questions now then.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not a member of the committee. Can I firstly just pay my own tribute to Paul as well? I've worked with him on Audit and Scrutiny for the last 10 years. Very good and diligent member of staff, as we all know. But my question is regarding, just a follow on from Ray. I quite accept what the Chief Executive is telling us, that the rules and regulations have now been clarified and that's been satisfied, you know, with the external audit, internal audit, my apologies. But what I really want to ask is, it's the 316, it starts off by saying improvement is required. And what I'd really like to know is what improvements has been made or will be made. It must be quite difficult if we don't know what documents have been withheld or who withheld them. I can't see where or how improvement it will be made if we don't know these things. And secondly, I noted that it went to external audit. Sorry, just trying to find my notes here. That it went to external auditors, and I'm just wondering if they're what they're going to do with this information, and is that going to be reported back to this committee? Thanks very much, Chair. I'll wait till we go into private to get the answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCauley. I'll ask the Chief Executive to come in at this point and answer the points that he can answer before we go into private.
Well, happy to clarify that, Chair. I think in relation to the phrase improvement is required, I think I've obviously spoken to Mr McCaskill during the time of writing of the report. I think that is addressed by the last sentence, because given the rights and powers of internal audit in relation to access to documents has since been satisfactorily clarified. Obviously, there would be improvement if members of senior management were not adhering to that, but I've no reason to think that's the case. And sorry, what your second point was? External audit. Yes, I have discussed the matter with Audit Scotland, as you would expect. I mean, it's up to them. It's up to Audit Scotland what they report on the matter. But obviously, I have discussed the matter with them.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Councillor Mackenzie.
The last, again, at the end of that paragraph, which again the Chief Executive has touched on, the rights and powers of internal audit in relation to access to documents has since been satisfactorily clarified, confirming our initial assertion. What does that mean, actually? I mean, it could mean that, you know, it was it was wrongly carried out, but now we know that the internal audit had this right, so we agree now that we were wrong in the first place. Is that actually what it means?
Chief Executive, do you want to?
Well, Chair, at this point, I can only say it's not my report. This is Mr McCaskill's report. What I think he means is that, presumably, he means that improvement was required in relation to the rights of access by internal audit to documentation, and I think the first part of that sentence confirms that it's now been has since been satisfactorily clarified. I don't see what else it can mean, Chair, but it's not my report. No.
Thank you. Okay, we'll come back into this item in private, so we'll move on to. Sorry, Councillor McLean. Yeah.
Can I just make another complaint about these lights here? There's only two lights that come up at any one time, and we're pressing these buttons, and you're closing. Chair, rightly so, are closing the debate on it, but I've tried this button umpteen times, and I don't know about anybody else. I think you find it quite frustrating.
I think the problem is, yeah. Mr. McLean.
But sorry, I'm sorry for venting my frustration on you, Chair.
I think the issue is that you've got to press your button once, the light, leave it on, the light then flashes. I see it flashing in a queue. You take the flashing light as the first person to come in. I then put that light on to red. That person can speak. Once that's finished, that person puts the light mic up, and then the next mic flashes from green to red, or flashes green, and I can put on to red for answering. It's just we're getting more familiar with the new system. I think it's working a bit better, but I think it's just members. What's causing the problem, I think, from what I can see, is members are keeping pressing that button and they're actually knocking the system out. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it's members' fault.
I was going to ask, my Sheena was desperate since our last committee to come in and put you all right. But
that's always a chair's
I'll say with the
response. Members' fault. Anyway, no, sorry. I think that it's right that we should go into private on this matter because it relates to. But one shouldn't dismiss the good practice that has been going on in internal audit. And in 315, it mentions the good practice there. We've had qualified internal audits with extensive local, so on. If you read that, it's excellent practice that has been going on. And we have lost an excellent person in Paul McCaskill. He was honest, he was thorough, he was professional, you could talk to him at any time at all. And probably my question in private would be as well, was there much, did we make enough to keep this man on our books? Did we? But anyway, that'll come into private. There are a number of questions like what Mr. Mackenzie has highlighted on these, but as I say, it's better in private.
Okay, so we'll move on then to, Councillor Gordon Murray first of all, and then I've got Ronald coming in after. So Councillor Murray.
Chair, thanks. I also want to put on record my tribute to the ex-Chief Internal Auditor, Paul McCaskill. I felt that he was an excellent officer and he worked to an exceptionally high standard, and it's a real hard loss for the Corps to lose such a person to the organisation. It's really a difficult time. On this issue, I wanted to ask, do you think there's, I had mentioned previously about induction and training for the audit function. Do you think that might be open to officers as well? Because there seems to be a bit of a knowledge gap here that has caused a delay in the process.
Executive.
Yes, we will look at that. I mean, whether it's the same induction or one that's more specific, I don't know, but it'll certainly form part of the ongoing training, and we can advise the committee of that.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Fraser, Ronald Fraser. Councillor Fraser, are you there? You're on mute.
Yes, can you hear me, Chair?
We can hear you now, yes.
Yeah, I just wish to echo the sentiments of my colleagues in offering support to Mr McCaskill and wishing him all the best in his future endeavours. He was a good man to this organisation and he'll be sorely missed. Now, my question, I don't know whether the Chief Executive can answer this at the moment. Could the Chief Executive...
Could you... Sorry, we lost you for a wee while there, Councillor Fraser. Yeah, on you go.
Yeah. Could the Chief Executive publish the legal advice he received to members of the Audit Committee?
Chief Executive.
I can easily circulate a version of that advice. I say a version of that advice because obviously this was correspondence between two officers, so it's an email form with a lot of attachments, and it wouldn't be perhaps very easy to follow. But I'm certainly happy to make available what I have, because it was very, very helpful about what the statutory basis of audit is, what the professional basis of audit is in terms of the professional audit standards, what the financial regulations say about internal audit, because internal audit's authority derives from our own financial regulations. And I was pleased to say, I'm pleased to advise rather, that I didn't consider these needed any amendment, that they're pretty wide as they should be as regards investigations. So there's no issue about the advice. Arguably we should have done that years ago. It's been very, very helpful to all about the basis of internal audit, their powers, and also how they go about their business, just as others go about their business in relation to internal audit. I mean, this is one instance in, how long have I been here? 16 years of an alleged, refusal to make available information. In many ways, that is given the internal audit, like other services, can be in an investigatory environment. That's pretty good. But it's one too many, and I don't like it. And I want everybody to know what they are there to do, what their rights are, what their duties are, and how they go about their business. And this is about all three aspects of that, and I can't say any more in public, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Okay, so we'll move on now to. Sorry, Councillor McKeever.
It's that long since I was going to ask the question. I've aged quite a bit, but I was actually, you might be surprised to hear, I was in support of the Chief Executive's comments. People trying to get to see people when they come in here. It was never the case that you could come in and go straight to a person. You always had to make an appointment. And I've always found making an appointment, even in the current system where somebody is aware that you want to contact them, they then contact you at a given date or time. So if people were educated into the fact that they make appointments, it'll be easier for them to then meet the relevant officers they want to speak to.
Absolutely.
And finally, just again to just say what a shame it is that given the difficulty in replacing internal auditors, it's a shame that we weren't able to keep them. And even the two Mr. McCaskills, we even had succession there if the other one had stayed as well. It's a shame that we don't. We never kept them.
No, yeah, we'll cover that when we come into the private matter. Okay, so we'll move on now to item 15, performance monitoring. These are reports outstanding. Now, for the information on new members, this may seem an onerous list of reports. However, some of these are annual and biannual reports, and we also used as a checkpoint for follow-up of performance monitoring following internal audit reviews. There are a few items that have been delayed due to staff absence and recruitment within the audit section. The list will be updated following today's discussion, and the outstanding items will come to the September committee. So this is just for noting. You will see that there are quite a few follow-ups that are on there, which will come back to September. So to the September issue. Councillor Gordon Murray.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the part 12, the draft annual accounts that came up at item 12 at the agenda. I just wanted to know, did you rule item 12 urgent at the start of the meeting?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah. I think I did. I'll see. It was urgent. I think so. That's all I can say. I mean, when you go back, I think it was an urgent item on the agenda. Yeah. I would need to check, Gordon. I can't remember going back to what I said at the start of the meeting there on that item. So, but it would have been an urgent item. The report. Yeah.
It was the appendix.
Yeah, it's the appendix to the report that was late. Yeah. Okay, so before we go into private, there's one other thing I would like to add on. As you are all aware, has come up at every other committee this week, is that my machine is obviously leaving us in another week. This will be our last committee. It'll likely be our last full committee of council. I'd like to express my gratitude to my machine for all the work that she has done, personally for me, for the audit committee. She's been a rock and a tower of support over the time, I must say. It's going to be a great miss to not just the audit committee, it's going to be a great miss to everybody in the corner. Maddy's been here close on 30 years, and it's another wealth of experience that is going. So we seem to have this recurring theme at the moment where we're wishing people all the very best, but I genuinely wish Maddy all the very best in whatever life comes our way and whatever pursuits you have, Maddy. And on behalf of the committee, thanks again for all your support and help. Thank you. Before we go into private, the next scheduled meeting of the committee will be on Thursday, the 22nd of September. We'll now go into private.